Here we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Nell, and this is the Kansas African American Affairs Lunch and Learn. I once again, this is going to be a pre-recorded one. It's not going out live, and I love this ability to do that because then I can talk to people when I can get a hold of them. I am thrilled to death to be joined by Miss Angela Bates. Hello, Miss Bates.
Hi, Stacy. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing
That's
good.
great.
I'm glad. Y'all, we have had like fits and starts. and, and most of it being my fault, but I'm so glad to have her here. Miss Bates is most closely associated with Nicodemus, Kansas, and the Historical Society out there and the National Park out there. And so I'm grateful to have her on today to talk about your work out in Nicodemus.
Okay. It's great to be here and talk to you.
Okay, so I'll read a little bio for the 15 people who may not know who you are, because a lot of people know who you are. Angela Bates's ancestors were among the original settlers of Nicodemus in 1877. She grew up in Pasadena, California, but her family's trip to Kansas drew her to relocate to this state, and she received a bachelor's degree in education from Emporia State University. Ms. Bates has devoted much of her career to sharing the history of African American migration and the preservation of history and architecture of Nicodemus. She's a member of the National Parks Conservation Association and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She has served as the president of the Nicodemus Historical Society, and she shares her stories through performances, documentaries, radio, and television. She's received the Kansas Samplers Foundation's We Can Award for her work in historic preservation. She's received the Brown Foundation's Award for Excellence in Preserving African American History, and she's been honored by the Kansas Humanities Councils for outstanding contributions. The National Trust has named her a preservation hero, and she was named the Woman of Distinction by the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Committee of Topeka. So thank you for coming on our show today.
Thank you.
And I also want to do a little plug because you were our most recent KAAAC's most recent keynote speaker for the Martin Luther King program that we had just this January.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And a Kansas trailblazer that the Kansas African American Museum in Wichita gives out. Yeah.
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 Fantastic. Okay, so a question I ask everybody: what are you having for lunch today?
You're not going to ask me that because I don't even know if I'll have lunch today. Maybe by the time I get finished, I'll have a late lunch or early dinner.
Well, it's legit. It's legit. I haven't given much thought to my lunch today either. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I had a good breakfast, and so I'm not super hungry right now. It hasn't really crossed my mind. Mm-hmm. Okay, but let's talk about Nicodemus. So again, for people who may not know about Nicodemus, it's a small unincorporated town in Graham County. Mm-hmm. And go ahead, and this is where I'm gonna stop talking and just let you go. So talk to us about the settling of Nicodemus, okay. Who settled it, how they got here, and just what the history of the town is.
Okay, Nicodemus is primarily the oldest and only remaining all-Black town west of the Mississippi that was started at the very end of Reconstruction. That meant there were a lot more all African American towns. Probably the other one that's most noted is Boley, Oklahoma. A lot of times people say, well, what about Boley, Oklahoma or Langston? Well, those towns were definitely started as all Black towns, but they were started after the turn of the century, Nicodemus being 1877, like I said, at the end of Reconstruction. The reason that Nicodemus came into being was because African Americans were being pushed, so to speak, because of the Jim Crow laws to the west, and the draw was homesteading or land that they could acquire. And the impetus for these towns were town speculators, more or less, that had a vision to create a town, name it after themselves sometimes. In the case of Nicodemus, named after a African-American slave who purchased his freedom. And there was a song that was created about him, and he said, "Wake him up for the great Jubilee," which would have been when freedom came for all African Americans. So the name of the town comes after that song, "Wake Nicodemus." And so several ministers, about 5 ministers and one white man, created the Nicodemus Town Company. They went to their former home, which was in Kentucky, and they promoted the town to the churches, to the church congregations, and told them that they had an alternative to the Jim Crow laws and the violence that was happening in the South. They could come and homestead, get government land, as well as participate in establishing an all-Black town called Nicodemus. And that's what they did. Three major groups settled at Nicodemus. The first one arrived in 1877. There were the founding fathers and a few members that had come out to, locate the town, plat the town out. But the first real group of people that came, that they solicited, came from Kentucky, Lexington and Georgetown, and they came in September of 1877.
About how many people was this
It was
first
about
group?
350 people that actually.
Oh, so that was not a small.
No, it was quite a few people, and then people kind of trickled in as they heard about Nicodemus, and then a large group came in from the Scott County area, the Georgetown area. They came in the spring of 1878. And then the last group came in the spring of 1879. And so altogether in its heyday, there was close to 600 people that actually settled in the Nicodemus town and the township.
Wow.
And that's basically how it got started. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's fantastic. So 600, I mean, I know there are towns now that don't have 600 people. That's so.
We don't have that many today. I mean, we're down to less than 25 people actually occupy Nicodemus, the town itself. But then there's people that live in the township, in the outlying areas. And then there's descendants that live in, like I live in Bogue, which is 5 miles away. There's descendants that live in Stockton and in Hill City and in Palco, which these are some of the surrounding towns. So the population actually in Nicodemus is less than 25. But, the descendants live all over the United States, and there's thousands of us. And we always come back for the annual Emancipation celebration at the end of July.
I am so familiar with the feel of Nicodemus, how it was a town, but then people live in surrounding areas. My mother's family's been in Kansas for 4 generations. My father's family's been in Kansas for a while, but they trace their lineage to a place called Dalton, Missouri, which very much has the feel of Nicodemus. And when I went out to Nicodemus the first time, I was like, oh, this just feels like home. And still the same thing. People live in like Salisbury and like other places that are sort of Keatsville that are surrounding Dalton. So, but Nicodemus. Okay, so Nicodemus was established in 1877. 300 or so people came out. So how did it go? How did the building of the settlement go? When
they first got there, obviously, this is the high plains of western Kansas. And so at that time, there were no trees at all.
Right.
And of course, this was considered the Great American Desert, too. But so the people had to live in dugouts. They dug literally in the ground or in embankments, and they lived in dugouts for some of them for years until they could get a plow on the town site. And then they started building above ground places that were called sod houses. And then eventually they used the native stone, limestone. Wood was very expensive and scarce and hard to get. And so they started using the native limestone to actually build buildings. And they, people continued to kind of trickle into this little town. And in its heyday, it was right before the railroad was going to lay their tracks. So about 1886, the railroad was looking to lay track through the area. They required bond money for each township that the railroad was going to go through. And Nicodemus had, approved a bond to attract the railroad. It was one of the largest communities in the county at the time. And we were right in direct line and on the north side of the Solomon River, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to bring the railroad into the county seat, which was Hill City, and it needed to be on the north side. So I don't know, it went blank there for a second. I just had to hit that. But anyway, so when the railroad did not come to Nicodemus, they created a town about 4 miles to the west, which is the town of Bogue, where I live. And this was a railroad town, and it drew the economic base out of Nicodemus. The businesses.
Is there any rationale given as to why the railroad didn't go through Nicodemus, or is it going to be the answer that we know?
I think it's the answer that we know. I
Okay.
think you can speculate that there was no way they were going to put it through Nicodemus, although there was the talk, there was the advocating of the bond money and all of that. But in the end, when they were laying the track, everybody thought they were going to be bringing it into Nicodemus, but 4 miles to the south, they turned it and it started to go to the northwest rather than going directly in to Nicodemus. And where the border of the Nicodemus Township is the Solomon River, and Bogue sits just south of the Solomon River a mile. So not even a mile. We sit right next to the river, basically. So you can speculate as to why. To me, it was the ultimate Jim Crow. There was no way they were going to allow that to happen. And as a result, and I think it was a strategic move on behalf of W.R. Hill, who had started Hill City, and he was also the impetus for the establishment of Nicodemus. But he was always in bed, so to speak, with the railroad companies. He was one of their railroad agents. So I think ultimately he knew that because Nicodemus was well established at the point, that the county seat just did not have the population. But anyway, people pledged their support. He was in cahoots with the Pomeroys who owned the railroad. And so it bypassed Nicodemus by 4 miles. And so from that point on, the bank, which operated in Nicodemus, and the two mercantile stores and a hotel picked up their buildings if they could and relocated them to the town of Bogue. And that pulled the economic base out of Nicodemus. And from that point onward, it really went into a major downward spiral. And, because of the Dust Bowl years of the 30s and the Great Depression, and just the outmigration of people, trying to find jobs, trying to make a living, it just dwindled over the years.
Right.
But in 1996, we were designated a unit of the National Park Service.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to bring that up because I know that Nicodemus is a national park, but yeah, I was asking you before we started, who started, did the city reach to the Park Service, or did the Park Service, you're like, okay, all right, come on now, tell the story.
Well, basically what happened was, I'll try to make a long story short. When I was living in Washington, D.C., I lived right around the corner from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I had an interior design business. And I was working on a project that was a historic landmark. So I got familiar with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the landmark buildings and that kind of thing. And so when I moved to the Denver area, when I left DC in 1984, I moved to Denver. And at that time, my cousin, Verl Schweitzer, was really heading up efforts for preservation at Nicodemus. And his best friend and old college mate, Ira Hutchison, was head of historic Black colleges. And when I was living in DC, Verl came a couple of times and he asked me to go over to the meetings with him. And Ira said, Nicodemus really should be a unit of the National Park Service. We know it's a landmark. We got that designation, but it really needs to be a unit of the National Park Service. So I'm like, okay, so what do we do? He said, well, it takes an act of Congress. I'm like, okay. Well, I was living in DC at the time, but then when I moved to Denver and I was closer to home, so to speak, and I got a chance to talk to Verl quite a bit, I just decided, well, we needed to start a historical society so we could start preserving our history. And we were being written up in magazines and newspapers all over the United States. So I started a historical society. And then in 1989, I actually moved here to the area. And when I did that, I thought, okay, now what we need to do is go for this national site designation. But the Historical Society did not own any of the 5 historic buildings. So I got my aunt and uncle to donate the AME Church, which was one of the sites. They dedicated it, or not dedicated it, they donated it to the Historical Society. And once we got the church, then we went for national site designation. And then we pulled in the Baptist Church, the St. Francis Hotel and Post Office that Verl owned, the one-room school that the American Legion owned, and of course the Township Hall, which is owned by the township. So we collaboratively went for national site designation. It took about 6 years. They had to do a feasibility study to see if it was really warranted being included into the national park, and it did. Then we did drafted legislation. Then it went to Congress. It went onto the floor of Congress. Senator Dole and Pat Roberts, they presented it. Excuse me, and then it was voted on by Congress, and it was passed. And that happened on November the 11th, 1996 is when we actually got the designation.
Wow.
Yep. So since then, I thought really after that it was, it was a piece of cake, but no, that's when the real work started. I thought, once that designation took place, it was going to be easy from that point onward, but you can't deliver a baby and just leave it sitting there. It's got to be taken care of. It has to be
good analogy. Good analogy.
Yeah. And so basically that's what we had to do, was we started working with the Park Service, and we did what was called a general management plan. That's the first thing that you do. And then from that, you start to do all kinds of other things. Work with the National Park Service and the property owners to get their places brought into the historic preservation mode. And that's what's taken so long. The visitor center is located in the township hall. Right. So they have a facade easement and some grounds easement that's in place for the next, I think, 99 years. And so they restored or refurbished the outside of the building and put a French drain in, and they maintain the grounds around it. Their
National Parks Association does.
Yes, the National Park Service. And so they're in the process of working out facade easement for the First Baptist Church, but the congregation, basically, we've all voted to donate the building. It's in such bad shape, to donate the building to the National Park Service and or sell it to them through the National Trust. Through the Trust for Public Lands. They will purchase it, and then they turn around and give it to the Park Service so they can do what they need to do. The other two buildings, the St. Francis Hotel and the school, are still in private hands, and we're working with those property owners to try to get them to work with the Park Service to get those buildings up to historical preservation standards.
Right.
It's a long process, but it'll probably outlast all of us. But the point is, it is designated, and the interpretation that is being done on the town site in collaboration with the Historical Society and any other entity that's interested in working with preservation in Nicodemus is working to achieve that goal, so that we actually do historic preservation of those historic buildings, maintain them, as well as tell the story, the history of Nicodemus through living history projects. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 26, 27 years now.
I love it. I think it's so important. I know in recent years there's been a great discussion about the history of America and what stories get told and what stories don't get told. And so I know for me, hearing about Nicodemus and learning about Nicodemus, even one of the reasons I mentioned that this has taken fits and starts to get us, is I started to do some research. I've been to Nicodemus twice now, but then started to do some research online and thought, holy mackerel, there's so much to learn.
Yes, there is.
Right? There's so much to learn, and it's such a rich history. And I know for myself, knowing that my family's got roots in Kansas and Nebraska. Our roots are not necessarily in Nicodemus, but reading the Nicodemus story, it sounded very familiar to the Dalton story, right? Or like I said, when I was in Nicodemus, I'm like, oh, this feels like home here. Like I really felt like this is it felt very similar to me. And I wanted to have you on to give you a chance to tell the story, just the full story of the history of Kansas.
Yes, it's not just. I think the Nicodemus story is the story of African Americans in the West. It's not just the story of Nicodemus. It really represents what African Americans did with their freedom by participating in Manifest Destiny, by moving to the West, starting their own all-Black towns, governing themselves, homesteading, all of that. And I think a lot of times when we look at Western history, we only think of cowboys and Indians. But it's unfortunate that the Native Americans were forced off of their land, put onto reservations. But here is a group of people, African Americans, many of them formerly enslaved, that are taking an opportunity for the first time to exercise freedom and the choice to experience freedom in a new way. And they did that here in the West by starting their own all-Black towns and governing themselves. So Nicodemus becomes that icon for the African American experience in the West. And we had the Black cowboys, we had the Black politicians, which were absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there were movers and shakers all over. But when you look at the Western history, you look at Nicodemus and you see all kinds of people of greatness being incubated in this town, like Edward P. McCabe, who became the Nicodemus Town Company secretary, went on to become the first clerk in the county. He and his partner, Abram Hall, who was from Chicago, they forced the organization of the county. So Nicodemus becomes the first township in Graham County. They have their first elections right there in Nicodemus. And so they were movers and shakers. And Edward P. McCabe became the first African American to be elected in the state. And that I have actually heard that he was the first to be elected in any northern state after the Civil War.
So Nicodemus was organized before, because the county seat now is Hill City?
Yes.
But Nicodemus was organized before Hill City was?
Yes. Nicodemus was established in 1877, and W.R. Hill was a part of the founding of that. But he had his eyes on setting the county seat where he was going to establish his town, which was Hill City. But the town of Millbrook actually won the county seat election. But what happened, it got blown away in a tornado. And so as a result, they ended up making Hill City the county seat. Gotcha. But Edward P. McCabe and Abram Hall and John Niles, these were three phenomenal African-American men in the West. I know we know about Bass Reeves and a whole bunch of other people that were doing some things, but here you have the first African-American elected to a state office. He was the state auditor. I mean, he's handling money. He's making and breaking people's careers, so to speak, as it relates to, handling the treasury for the state. He goes on to leave after 2 terms. He leaves and he goes to Langston, and the town of Langston. He helps to get that organized in Oklahoma. He helps to start the university there. Then he goes over to Guthrie, and he really and he became the auditor for the territory of Oklahoma. And then after they received statehood, he became the state auditor. Then the man was phenomenal. Then he was trying to prompt the government to set aside land to establish an all-Black state in the Oklahoma territory. That didn't work, but he went on to help people get established in Canada. The man was phenomenal. And when he died, he moved back to Chicago. And when he died, his wife brought his body back to Topeka. So he's buried right there in a cemetery in Topeka. The man was phenomenal. His partner was the first census taker, Abram Hall. The man was just unbelievable, could speak 3 languages fluently. Just phenomenal people. And the one that's probably a lot of people have not heard of him is John Niles. John Niles became the president of the Nicodemus Town Company after he arrived. He helped establish the group of people that came in 1877. But here, this man he prompted Congress to look at reparations. He was the very first to talk about literally and legally reparations for African Americans that had been formerly enslaved. The 2 county attorneys, the first 2 county attorneys were Black. G.W. Jones was a phenomenal Black attorney. I mean, he went up against the Union Pacific Railroad and won, and did so much so that the Union Pacific wanted to hire him as their attorney after they lost to him, and he said no. The second county attorney never lost a case. That was my great uncle, W.L. Sayers. So I could go on. I could even talk about the women that did phenomenal things. Kim Thomas recently served for like 13 or 18 years as the first African American mayor in the state of Kansas. She was the mayor in a town that was Stockton, or that is Stockton, and they initially had sundown laws. I mean,
And when was this? What year was this?
I think she served from, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think she served from like 20 or 1999 or something like that. But she served, here until probably about 4 or 5 years ago is when she resigned as she no longer ran as the mayor, but she served for like 13 to 18 years as the mayor of Stockton. Phenomenal. I mean, I can just keep going on, but I think
I know
innovation for greatness.
We're at 25 minutes, so there's other things I wanted to move on and talk about.
Okay.
So I know that first of all, I want give your commercial for the Nicodemus homecoming weekend.
Oh yes, we have our big emancipation celebration this year. I think it's our 140 year.
145.
Yeah, it's the last weekend in July the 27th through 29th, 28th, 29th, 30th. And it's that weekend. Saturday is always the big day. During that time period, we will have the Voices and Votes Smithsonian exhibit here. It's going up July 1 and it's coming down the 13th of August.
So tell us about that exhibit. The Voices and Votes.
The exhibit is really about democracy in America and the right to vote. And so it's the history of that. And in conjunction with that exhibit, we had to create an exhibit that dealt with our politicians of Nicodemus. And so there will be a 3-panel exhibit on our politicians, some of the ones I just spoke about. And so it's a huge exhibit. It will take up the entire township hall. We have guest speakers that will be there from, on that Saturday, we have a guest speaker from the Dole Institute that will talk about Dole's involvement with the designation of Nicodemus. Up between now and then, we have Kim Thomas is going to be speaking on June the 17th. And June the 10th, we have reenactors of Everett P. McCabe and his partner, Abram Hall. So, and then during the celebration, there's all kinds of activities that are going to be going on.
I saw that there was karaoke. And so I was like, oh.
Okay, so if you sing, you need to get on the board. If you're going to be here, you need to be on that roster so that you can sing.
I do love a good karaoke. Do you karaoke? Yeah.
I've never done it. No, I sing, but I don't do karaoke. I've never done it.
Miss Bates.
I know. I do a lot of things, but I sing, but I would not say that I've got a good enough voice to do anything like that.
Miss Bates, if I come do karaoke, you have to do karaoke.
Well, we'll see. I can sing Amazing Grace.
You know what? And I tell people it's all about picking the right song.
Yes, I can sing Amazing Grace. Yes.
You gotta read the audience, pick the right song. You never fail with something that everybody knows because they'll sing along with you, and then you won't even have to sing that loud. So Amazing Grace, given the crowd, Amazing Grace might be a good choice.
Okay.
There you go.
So that's what's happening during our emancipation celebration. We invite everybody out. It's been going on for like a number of years, and at one time, at the turn of the century, I heard that it rivaled the state fair. So it's been around, and people know about it all over the state. Everybody's welcome to come.
Yes. All right. Nicodemus weekend again is July 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th out in Nicodemus. It is quite an event. There are a lot of people who show up for it. There's booths, food, there's shopping. People have little mercantile booths set up. There's a parade, right? Will there still be a parade?
Oh yeah.
Pancake breakfast on that Saturday morning. So it's definitely worth the trip. If you have not visited the Nicodemus area, to go out there and to see the site, the town hall where the park is located, the exhibits that are there are wonderful, very educational. I like I said, I do plan on making the trip out there this year to visit during homecoming. So
I'll say one more thing, and I'll just plug our documentary that we're doing. We're hoping to have that finished by the end of July. We'll start premiering it the next month or so. So it's about how the first group arrived and how they walked from Ellis over to Nicodemus, which is called the Ellis Trail. And so we had wagons, and the reenactors that actually participate were descendants of that first family that actually migrated out in 1877. So look forward to seeing that documentary in your area.
Definitely. The last time I was out to Nicodemus, I think you showed us like a 10-minute snippet, just a little. Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's going to be fantastic. And I know there's been some renewed interest in Nicodemus.
Yes. Well, you know what? The population is always dwindling, and there's less people that are actually occupying Nicodemus. So, you know, our generation, we're the older ones now. So we're talking about how can we make Nicodemus more attractive and more appealing for the next generation or for others that are interested in moving here. So, you know, we had John Ella Holmes created a little tiny house project. I think there's three or four of those little houses. We've got a landmark district association established, and we're hoping to do a lot more interpretation throughout the town through signage, as well as some programs that will engage a lot more of the descendants. So there is this renewed interest. I say the light bulb has gone off on the next generation's head, so they realize the importance of their legacy and participating in the preservation of it.
Fantastic. All right, well, we're at time. I want to thank you, Ms. Bates, for giving up just a half an hour of your time to talk about the history of Nicodemus. I know I could let you talk for another 2 hours and you would not run out of stories. But thank you for sharing with us, the audience, a little bit of your knowledge about Nicodemus history.
And anybody is invited to come to Nicodemus anytime, not just during the celebration. We're open all year long. The visitor center is there. During the season, which is the spring and summer, we usually have a lot of people, and you can get tours. You can contact myself at the Historical Society or the visitor center, and there's a lot to see beyond just the town site itself. We've got signs put up out in the township, at the homesteads, at the places where there were schools and cemeteries and all of that. So it'll be worth your trip to come.
Definitely. And in the final minutes, and I'm glad that the Smithsonian exhibit is called Voices and Votes, because I always take a couple minutes at the end to talk about voting. It's so important for me to continue to tell our community we need to make sure that we're registered to vote and that we make a plan to vote. So I'm not talking about voting just because there's an election in 5 days. I'm talking about voting when it's not like cool to talk about voting, because it is just that important, right? I mean, Ms. Bates talked about the history of Black people being elected to office in Kansas, and there's not tons and tons of Black people in elected office right now. There's a good number, but if I sit here and think about it, I'm like, no, there's some good representation at the city council level and on school boards. But I think just making sure that we as a community continue to know that our vote is so important. And from the moment we achieve freedom, the right to secure our vote and to protect our vote has been very important. So
absolutely.
All right.
Come see the exhibit.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Again, this is a pre-recorded thing, so I'll figure out how the chat's going to work and put all the information, links to the Historical Society and to the parks and information about homecoming. And I hope to see everybody in Nicodemus.
All right.
And have a wonderful week. See you next time. Bye.